There's something profoundly unsettling to a narcissist when you walk away in silence, not with a bang, not with a dramatic confrontation, not with a trail of explanations, just stillness, followed by your absence. Because you see, the narcissist's power doesn't come from who they are. It comes from your response to who they are. Your emotional engagement is the fuel that sustains their illusion of control. So when you withdraw that attention without warning, without begging, without even offering them the dignity of a closing argument, something inside them fractures. They can't understand it. And more importantly, they can't control it. What we're dealing with here isn't just interpersonal conflict, it's a deeper philosophical confrontation with identity and dependency. The narcissist has crafted an internal world in which they are the gravitational center. And in that world, your orbit exists solely to affirm them, to mirror back their grandeur, to provide emotional supply. When you walk away, you're not just exiting a toxic dynamic, you're removing their mirror. And for someone who depends on reflection to feel real, that's existentially destabilizing. Now, let's think about this. Why is the lack of explanation so powerful? Because it signals that you no longer seek understanding from them. You no longer place them in the position of emotional authority. In a relationship with a narcissist, much of your energy is spent trying to be seen, heard, validated. You explain your pain, hoping for empathy. You clarify your boundaries, expecting respect. But they don't operate on that frequency. They're not listening to understand, they're listening to manipulate. So the very act of explaining keeps you entangled in their web, and they know it. But silence is different. Silence says, I've already made peace with being misunderstood by you. And that's terrifying to someone who thrives on controlling your perception. They no longer have hooks in your psyche. Your stillness becomes a mirror they can't crack. It's at this exact moment, this quiet, unceremonious departure, that the narcissist is finally forced to confront your autonomy. You become an entity they can't shape. And that realization is more devastating than any insult, more frightening than any confrontation. Because the narcissist isn't afraid of your anger. Anger means you still care. They're afraid of your indifference. Indifference signals death to their illusion of omnipotence. This is a key psychological truth. People reveal their character when they lose control. A healthy individual, when confronted with your decision to leave, may feel sadness or confusion, but they will ultimately respect your choice. A narcissist, however, will spiral. They'll lash out, they'll play the victim, they'll try to provoke a reaction. Why? Because they're scrambling to restore the structure in which they are at the center. And if they can't reestablish that structure, they begin to collapse internally. Your silence holds up a mirror to their inadequacy. And there's a paradox here worth noting. You gain power not by overpowering the narcissist, but by refusing to play their game. Strength, in this context, is defined not by dominance, but by disengagement. You reclaim your agency not through resistance, but through release. It's not about shouting back. It's about walking away with your dignity intact. That's what they never see coming. That's the moment they are truly shocked, because you didn't play out the script they wrote for you. You tore it up, left the stage, and didn't even bother to explain why. And from a philosophical standpoint, this is a moment of profound individuation, the breaking of enmeshment. You cease to be a character in their drama and return to being the author of your own story. That's no small thing. That's psychological sovereignty. And it doesn't come with fanfare, it comes quietly, like sunrise breaking through after a long night. So if you're standing at that threshold, torn between explaining yourself one last time or simply walking away, understand this. Your silence is not weakness. It's maturity. It's strength. It's the loudest declaration that you now belong to yourself. And the narcissist will hear it even if you never say a word. The moment you begin to assert your boundaries, clearly, consistently and without apology is the moment a narcissist feels their control slipping. Because boundaries to a narcissist aren't just inconvenient, they are existential threats. They serve as undeniable proof that you are not an extension of them, not a tool to be used, not a reflection to manipulate. Boundaries declare that you are, in fact, a separate person with your own values, your own mind, and most dangerously, your own will. Now, it's important to understand what a boundary really is. It isn't a punishment. It's not about controlling others. It's about defining where you end and where someone else begins. Psychologically, it's the blueprint of self-respect. It's what tells the world and yourself that your time, your emotions, and your energy are not up for exploitation. For the narcissist who thrives in blurred lines and emotional enmeshment, this is intolerable. Because as long as those lines are unclear, they can manipulate your guilt, your empathy, your fear of abandonment. But the moment you draw that line clearly, they're forced to contend with something they cannot override: your sovereignty. What's so shocking to them is not just that you set a boundary, but that you enforce it. Narcissists often test limits to see if you really mean what you say. They'll ignore your no, mock your standards, or accuse you of being selfish. That's their way of reasserting dominance. And many people, out of fear, confusion, or a desire to keep the peace, fold under that pressure. But when you hold the line calmly and without emotional reactivity, it sends a very different message. It tells them that your self-worth is no longer negotiable. That's when panic sets in. There's a deeper psychological layer here, and it's worth examining. Narcissists fear boundaries not just because they lose control over others, but because it confronts them with their own limitations. See, someone who respects others' boundaries is someone who has a healthy relationship with their own. But narcissists tend to be boundaryless. Their sense of entitlement overrides their capacity for empathy. So when you assert a boundary, you mirror back to them something they've long avoided: the reality that not everything revolves around them, that others are not put on this earth to serve them, that love and attention are not entitlements. They are earned, respected, reciprocated. And that kind of truth is not just hard for them to hear, it's devastating. Many people struggle with the guilt that follows boundary setting. Especially if you're naturally empathetic, it feels harsh to say no. It feels wrong to walk away. But that guilt is often the residue of manipulation, a false narrative planted by those who benefited from your lack of boundaries in the first place. What you need to know is that your boundary is not cruelty. It's clarity. And clarity, while uncomfortable, is ultimately kind. It's kind to you because it protects your well-being. And it's kind to others because it teaches them how to engage with you respectfully or not at all. And let's talk about consequences. Because a boundary without consequences is just a suggestion. The narcissist will only take your words seriously if your actions back them up. That might mean stepping back from a relationship, limiting contact, or walking away entirely. And here's the paradox. The moment you do that, not out of spite, but out of integrity, you regain your power. Not power over them, but power over yourself. And that, in essence, is what terrifies the narcissist. You are no longer available for their emotional bait. You no longer dance to the rhythm of their dysfunction. And most importantly, you no longer look to them for validation. This is the shift. The exact moment they realize they cannot penetrate your boundaries is the moment they lose access to your inner world. And without access, they lose relevance. You become untouchable. Not because you're hardened, but because you're anchored. Anchored in truth. Anchored in worth. Anchored in the quiet strength that says, I know who I am, and I will not trade my peace for proximity. So, if you're wondering whether it's okay to draw that line, let me tell you, it's not just okay, it's necessary. Not because it changes them, but because it transforms you. And that transformation is the very thing they feared all along. When you begin to detach emotionally from the narcissist, something profound happens, not just on the surface of the relationship, but in the very foundations of the dynamic that once defined it. Emotional detachment is not apathy. It's not about coldness or cruelty. It is a psychological reorientation, a shift in how you allocate value, energy, and identity. And for the narcissist, that shift is terrifying, because as long as you are emotionally entangled, they have leverage. They feed off your reactions, your confusion, your guilt, your anger, even your attempts to please. Every emotion you invest is a thread they can tug. But when those threads are cut calmly, quietly, and with finality, they begin to realize that the game is over. This realization doesn't always come with drama or visible confrontation. Sometimes it's quiet, even anticlimactic. You don't scream, you don't beg, you don't try to explain yourself for the 100th time. Instead, you begin to see them not as a towering figure whose approval you must earn, but as a wounded individual trying to dominate others in order to avoid confronting their own emptiness. That clarity, seeing them for who they are without illusion or denial, is the death knell to their illusion of power. The philosophical depth here lies in the concept of detachment itself. In many traditions, Stoicism, Buddhism, even certain strands of Christian thought, detachment is a hallmark of inner freedom. It's not the absence of care, but the absence of compulsion. When you detach emotionally, you are no longer controlled by the narcissist's narrative. You no longer feel the compulsive need to defend yourself, to be understood, to make them see your worth. Why? Because you already see it. And that's the core of the shift. You're no longer living in reaction to their chaos. You're living in alignment with your own truth. Psychologically, this detachment is what breaks the trauma bond. That's the intense emotional tie created through cycles of idealization, devaluation, and intermittent reinforcement. It's why people stay stuck, because the narcissist gives just enough to keep hope alive, then pulls it away to keep control. But when you detach, you stop gambling on crumbs. You stop waiting for the next high. You stop believing that their change is your responsibility. That moment of detachment is not passive. It is an act of radical self-ownership. What makes this so devastating for the narcissist is that they no longer have access to your emotional dashboard. The buttons they used to push no longer respond. They try guilt, you're unmoved. They try flattery, you're indifferent. They try rage, you're calm. This confuses them deeply because your detachment reveals something they've always feared, that they were never in control of you to begin with. They only had as much power as you gave them, and now that you've withdrawn that permission, they're left with their own emptiness, their own lack of identity, something they've spent a lifetime trying to cover up by controlling others. Let's take it even deeper. Emotional detachment from a narcissist isn't just about leaving them behind. It's about reorienting yourself toward reality. Narcissistic dynamics often warp your perception of truth, of self, of what's normal. You begin to question your own judgment. But when you detach, that fog lifts. You see how much of your emotional world was shaped in response to their instability. And in that clarity, you reclaim something essential, your ability to trust yourself again. Now, this doesn't mean you stop feeling altogether. You still feel sadness, maybe grief, but your emotions are no longer dictated by their approval or rejection. You no longer crave what they withhold. You mourn what you lost, but you're no longer enslaved by the hope of getting it back. That's freedom. And it's the kind of freedom that's both unsettling and awe-inspiring, especially to someone who built their identity on the illusion of your dependence. And let me be very clear, this emotional detachment is not the final step in some revenge fantasy. It's not about winning. It's about healing. It's about no longer needing to win at all because you've already stepped out of the battlefield. You're no longer fighting for a relationship that was never mutual. You're building something better within yourself. So when that moment comes, when you finally feel that shift, when you realize you haven't thought about their approval in days, when their anger or silence no longer rattles your soul, you've arrived at something rare and powerful, emotional sovereignty. And that, more than any angry goodbye or dramatic confrontation is what truly shocks the narcissist, because they realize too late that the real power they had over you was never in what they said or did. It was in your belief that you needed them. The moment you stop believing that, they lose everything. When you stop participating in the narcissist's game, you don't just disrupt the rules, you dismantle the very structure that gave them power. Narcissists thrive on predictability, on emotional choreography, where they control the tempo, the reactions, the fallout. Whether through guilt, manipulation, or charm, they depend on your participation. They require your confusion, your anger, your desperate attempts to resolve the unresolvable. That's their stage, that's their drama. But when you step off that stage, when you no longer respond on cue, everything begins to unravel. Not just for them, but for you too, in a liberating way. This isn't about physical departure necessarily. You can leave a room, a house, even a marriage, and still be emotionally trapped in the narcissist's psychological theater. What we're talking about here is a different kind of departure, a refusal to play the part you've been cast in. You stop arguing when they bait you. You stop explaining yourself when they twist your words. You stop defending against accusations that were never about truth to begin with. And in doing so, you cut off the oxygen supply to their illusion of dominance. Now, let's be honest, this is incredibly difficult. Not because it's hard to understand intellectually, but because psychologically, many people who become entangled with narcissists have been conditioned over time to equate engagement with safety. If I just say the right thing, maybe they'll understand. If I just stay calm, maybe they'll stop. If I explain better, love harder, fix myself, maybe the chaos will stop. But it never does, because the chaos isn't accidental, it's strategic. The narcissist creates confusion to maintain control. Clarity is dangerous to them because it reveals the simplicity of the truth. They are not capable of reciprocal, honest, secure relationships. That's not a failing of yours, it's a reality of theirs. And so when you stop participating, you essentially force that truth into the light. It's like refusing to dance with someone who only feels alive while spinning in circles. You stand still. And suddenly they are left alone with the absurdity of their performance. It's disorienting for them, not because they miss you, but because without your reaction, they have no mirror. Narcissists need mirrors. They need someone to reflect their superiority, their victimhood, their rage. Without that reflection, they begin to lose grip on their narrative. They start to unravel, not always visibly, but internally, where their fear of irrelevance lives. This is why your non-participation is not passivity, it's power. You are no longer being pulled by their emotional gravity, and that makes you unpredictable. To someone who controls others by mastering their responses, unpredictability is threatening. They don't know what you'll say, they don't know how you'll respond, or worse, they know you won't respond at all. That's when the panic sets in. That's when they lash out, or plead, or shift tactics, but it's too late. Because once you've tasted psychological peace, once you've stopped dancing for dysfunction, you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unfeel the calm of not needing to fix what was never yours to fix. But let's take it deeper. Theologically and philosophically, this act of non-participation is akin to reclaiming your moral agency. It is the decision to no longer sacrifice your sanity for someone else's delusion. It's choosing to live in truth, even if that truth is painful, even if it means walking away from a relationship that once defined your identity. And this is where real maturity begins, not in confrontation, but in the refusal to continue playing a role that violates your integrity. Some will say you owe the narcissist closure, compassion, one last explanation. But ask yourself, what part of you feels obligated to soothe the person who hurts you? That question alone can open doors to deep psychological insight. Often, it's the wounded inner child who still believes love must be earned through suffering. When you stop participating, you're telling that inner child, we don't have to do this anymore. We don't have to prove our worth to people who refuse to see it. That's how healing begins, not with revenge, not with vindication, but with quiet, sustained, principled disengagement. You don't raise your voice, you raise your standards. You don't shut down, you wake up. And when the narcissist finally realizes you are no longer a player in their game, when they see that the script no longer works on you, their power dissolves, not in a blaze of glory, but in the slow collapse of a fantasy that can no longer be sustained.